No apologies. I'm Dana Loesch. So for a while now, we've been warned by the Department of Homeland Security and the Biden administration that the entire nation should be on the lookout for a domestic terror threat called white supremacy. It's why we were told the Capitol was wrapped in 8-foot-high fences after the election. Remember, that wasn't a spontaneous riot, according to the official narrative. That riot was coordinated by white supremacist terrorists in a coup. And that's why 25,000 National Guard were required and sent to D.C. because the threat was so grave, the Republic itself nearly fell. AOC is still emotionally scarred, and she wasn't even in the building or on the same block. That's how bad it was. So every day, all across this great land, Americans wake up in fear of these white supremacists that are everywhere and nowhere. They could be your neighbor with the American flag hanging off their porch. They could be that person sitting next to you in church who believes in the Constitution. In fact, it could be your pastor who believes in outdated things like the Bible. We must be vigilant. And now, the last time that the Democrats talked about white supremacy was when they were busy practicing it themselves, inventing things like the KKK and Jim Crow laws in the South. You'd think that they wouldn't want to bring up their party's past, but these days, white supremacy is all they talk about. Systemic racism, whiteness, white supremacy, and domestic terrorism. So why would Democrats talk like this ad nauseum? Where was all of this like the last 20 years, especially when for 8 years we had our first black president? Why now is this the Democrat Party's obsession? It's because they need an argument to radically transform America. After all, you don't radically transform nations that are good. So Democrats, they're busy talking up how evil we are as a nation. They don't really believe it, but the talking point is useful. So Democrats are exaggerating this domestic terror threat from white supremacists every chance that they get. So in any case, they've been waiting eagerly for more information on, well, we all have actually, on who exactly these white supremacist domestic terrorists are. Well, good news, because we just received greater clarity. They're parents. That's right, we've met the enemy, and the enemy is parents. I sound like a teenager from the 90s, or really any time. We know this because the National School Board Association has written to President Biden and asked federal agencies to investigate parents who pose a potential domestic terror threat. So here's a bit from the letter written on September 29th from the NSBA. They write, quote, coupled with attacks against school board members and educators for approving policies for masks to protect the health and safety of students and school employees, many public school officials are also facing physical threats because of propaganda purporting the false inclusion of critical race theory within classroom instruction and curricula, end quote. I fell asleep halfway through their statement. So according to this letter, the enemy is so dastardly and so evil, the federal government needs to get involved with these parents. So I need to describe who these white supremacist domestic terrorists called parents are and see what they're up to. See, they're parents. So that way you too can also be on the lookout for parents. One of the telltale signs that you're dealing with a domestic terrorist called a parent is that they believe in free speech and their right to stand up for their kids at school board meetings. So for example, here's a white supremacist parent father telling his school board that he believes critical race theory creates racial division and tells all black children that all white kids have it better. Watch.
When you talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other, how to dislike each other, that's pretty much what it's going to, I don't care what you say, it's pretty much what it's going to all come down to. You're going to deliberately teach kids, this white kid right here got it better than you because he white? You're going to purposely tell a white kid, oh, the black people are all down and suppressed. How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed? How did I get, first of all,
remember, we had him on the program. And here's another suspected white supremacist domestic terrorist, a parent, this one of a Muslim child. Now, this enemy of the state is named Tatiana Ibrahim. And here she is confronting her school board in New York. Watch.
Stop indoctrinating our children. Stop teaching our children to hate the police. Stop teaching our children that if they don't agree with the LGBT community, that they're homophobic.
I have no problem having a peaceful discussion. This is not a peaceful discussion.
No, that's your opinion. See, here we go again. This is peaceful. To me, this is peaceful.
Well,
I'm not burning, looting, and murdering. This is peaceful.
Now, I know that these don't look like white supremacist domestic terrorists. They just look like what they call parents, sick of their kids being indoctrinated by the public school system. It's confusing because these domestic terrorists called parents, like Tatiana, they're not burning and looting and pulling down statues and murdering people or threatening the police, but they are doing something far more frightening to the left. They're asking questions, and in many cases, criticizing their school boards. Here's another domestic terrorist parent asking why school boards would allow pornographic books like this one, ooh, beware, like this one, to be assigned to kids. Kids are, earmuff it, watch.
On page 19, not that it really matters in 4th grade, at a church youth group meeting out in the bushes, I touched Doug Goebel's and he touched mine. In fact, there was even some mouths involved.
Now, who does that domestic terrorist parent think she is? Doesn't she know that she's a terrorist for asking why any kind of pornography is being assigned as reading material for her teenager? Now, one of the things to look out for in these domestic terrorists called parents is their cultish belief that their children that they have and have raised and have given birth to or have adopted and incorporated into their family as they moved and incorporated all of them into their community. That's right, these domestic terrorists actually believe that the children that they've clothed and fed, and some have chest fed, it's a word now apparently that our medical community uses, science, that they're theirs to raise. They actually believe this. That means these domestic terrorists are easy to spot. Just look for a parent that is highly involved in their child's life, probably hugs that child a lot, maybe checks their phone occasionally to see what their kid's looking at, and even asks questions of their public school system hell-bent on indoctrinating their children. So, like I said, these domestic terrorists are part of an ancient cult that practices what they call parenting. That means they haven't gotten the memo from the Democrat Party that their kids now belong to the state. And that means the state determines what these kids learn, not the domestic terrorist parents practicing their parenting. Democrat gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe just made this case in a recent debate last week. Watch.
Veto books, Glenn, not to be knowledge about it, also take them off the shelves. And I'm not going to let parents come into schools and actually take books out and make their own decisions. I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
See? White supremacist domestic terrorist parents don't understand that Democrats like Terry McAuliffe, government raises your children. The state decides what your children should be taught and what they should believe. If critical race theory or any kind of pornographic, gay or straight sex is what the state wants to teach your teenager, then so be it. It's not your call. You're just a domestic terrorist parent, after all. And if you don't agree with that, then the FBI may need to put you on a no-fly list. It's not clear just yet what we should do with this dangerous new enemy of the state called parents. But Jen Psaki and the Biden administration think we need to take this domestic terrorist threat very, very seriously. Watch this.
We take the security of public servants and elected officials across the country very seriously, and obviously these threats to school board members is horrible. They're doing their jobs. Obviously there are going to be different law enforcement authorities that will be related to each community and where this is happening. So we'd certainly refer you to them about any specific threats, and we'd encourage individuals to report any threats they face to local and state law enforcement agencies. And we're continuing to explore what more can be done from across the administration. But again, a lot of this will be local law enforcement and how they can help ensure these school board members feel protected.
Did you hear that? Halfway through that clip, she said these school board members are just doing their jobs, giving your kids pornographic reading material, teaching them that America is this white supremacist nation, asking your kids to announce their gender pronouns, and telling your kids that being white makes them oppressors. That's just the school board doing their job. How dare a parent ask a question about any of this? Of course, that's how you know who the domestic terrorists are, the parents who ask questions. Those are the ones that clearly belong in Gitmo. Now, see, the parents who are not domestic terrorists understand that even their kids' health choices are not up to them. Just look at California Governor Gavin Newsom. He just actually got out of being recalled. He won his recall race, and he's now determined, and he's decided officially that he's going to make your child's health choices for you. California will now even decide what goes in your child's body, because Gavin Newsom just made California the first state to mandate that all students K through 12, public or private schools, they must get the vax. Now, currently that means kids 12 and over will be mandated to get jabbed if they want to go to any kind of school and learn. that their skin color is the most important thing about them, or read up on the latest pornographic sex, or learn how America is a horrible country. And soon, when they approve that vax for 5-year-olds, parents will be required to jab them too. Now, just 35 total children have died, have had fatalities from coronavirus in California. That's if you can trust that number, because remember, it's the CDC number, and it comes from the same slate of numbers that the Wall Street Journal and Johns Hopkins had to vet. So actually, there isn't that many in California that have had fatalities strictly due to coronavirus. They had serious other comorbidities, some of them terminal. But anyway, this is a state of 40 million people, and there is a known issue with myocarditis occurring in teenage boys. They're studying this right now. So far, I haven't come across anything peer-reviewed. This adverse reaction may be rare, but so is the threat to kids from COVID. So in any case, if you're a parent who feels some hesitation to vax their 12-year-old, it's still totally understandable, right? Well, how is it that you can be hesitant to get it and people cannot be hesitant to not get it? Why is it not treated the same way? Especially since it's a therapeutic and doesn't actually transfer immunity. So in California, if you were to push back on this vaccination for your 12-year-old, you might be labeled a domestic terrorist parent, a threat to the community, a murderer. Maybe your kid should be taken from you. If it's not clear by now that what's happening is this, any person on the right who holds any kind of traditional constitutional American value is no longer considered a good and decent citizen. You're essentially a terrorist now, and you're the worst kind. A white supremacist. It doesn't matter if you're Hispanic. I mean, I think that the left decided 5 years ago that that's considered white adjacent. I don't even know what that means, but that's what we were told. I'm actually being completely serious. Look at what Democrats are doing. They're purging the military of anyone that would question the narrative or question really the lack of accountability for the military. Our own government has designated people with traditional values as being enemies of the state. And here's the weird thing. In the name of diversity, they don't actually care. That's the only thing they're diverse about, is purging anybody who has a different thought from them, white, black, or otherwise. And they're doing all of this after a year in which leftist groups burned and looted city after city, violently assaulted police, pulled down statues, attacked law-abiding citizens. Has there been a terror warning for that actual real-life threat? No. Nope. Antifa, which rioted again this weekend in Portland, they're still not even considered a real group. They're just an ideology. That was according to Jerry Nadler. But you know who is a real threat that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security need to watch out for? Parents. Parents who believe their schools that they pay for with their tax dollars, because you never actually get to own your own property ever, ought to not indoctrinate their children and be responsive to parents. But no. Parents who stand up and passionately defend their kids from Marxist ideologies, parents who assert their right to control the health decisions of their children, these parents, they are the new enemy. Because what's happening right now is this: the Biden administration has decided that they aren't interested in the democratic process anymore. They have objectives, and they intend to implement those objectives. And anyone who gets in the way, they will be discarded or run over by the state. That's how nurses can be fired 1 year after being called heroes, because they disobeyed Marxist Democrats who mandated that they get vaccinated even if they have natural immunity. That's how segregation comes back. Something that disproportionately affects black people in New York 1 year after Democrats shouted Black Lives Matter. Now, black people in New York are in the way of Democrats and their vax mandates, which they apparently value more than actual people. So black Americans are no longer useful, and now they're discarded. Now it's parents that are in the way, because they're in the way of an administration who is all in on COVID hysteria and critical race theory. And when you disagree with the administration on these issues, they have a way of dealing with you. Call you anti-vax, call you a racist, and not just an anti-vax racist, but also a white supremacist. And if that doesn't work, they'll raise the ante and call you a domestic terrorist, an actual enemy of the state. BLM or Antifa get a pass. Those are just ideologies fighting for social justice. And who has time to go after them when there's much more dangerous domestic terrorists on the loose? Those enemies of Marxist progress called parents. So coming up, we continue the conversation with Corey DeAngelis, PhD, and the National Director of Research for the American Federation for Children. He's been very outspoken about the fight for our kids' education. He's probably a domestic terrorist. Stay with us. The Social Security Administration's